This is Dan McCarty, four-time Stanley Cup champion, Detroit Red Wings, Lemieux killer, Stanley Cup winning goal guy. You're listening to SportsRadioDetroit.com.
Pucking around.
Oh, Jesus.
Welcome, everybody, to Pucking Around here on Sports Radio Detroit. I'm Jason Pinkham, and I'm here today with the franchise, Steve Height. And we came into this recording with the fury of the playoffs, which is to say we were mostly bored. And it has been a playoffs, I guess. Steve, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well. Running on a limited amount of sleep, but we're going to make this work this week.
A limited amount of sleep and a limited amount to talk about. We even after taking a week off, we gave the NHL a whole extra week to finish its shit, and it couldn't do that because Ottawa's like, no, we're boring.
I was going to say, just when in doubt, you blame Ottawa for anything.
That's honestly, they are the Brendan Smith of pucking around right now. Like, go fuck yourself, Ottawa.
That's a great comparison. I enjoy that.
I hate Ottawa. Can I just say that? I really, truly hate watching Ottawa versus Pittsburgh.
I don't like Ottawa because just like they play the same game Anaheim does. It's so boring. They play 1-3-1 in the neutral zone. They just sit back, and then they just happen to, the one game you don't expect them to score a power play goal in. They score a power play goal, and then they win the game, and you're just like, why? I just want Pittsburgh to win so we can go to the Stanley Cup Finals. Like, why?
Right, let's move this on. And now if they go to the Stanley Cup Finals, hooray. I can't wait to watch a team who lost its top-tier scoring center face a team that plays the trap. That will be so exciting. I cannot wait to talk about it.
I think I'd rather watch NBA free throw shooting than that.
I think I'd rather watch the NBA dunk contest.
That's bad.
It would be more exciting. But let's dive into this a little bit. Since we last recorded, obviously we take a week off during the postseason because we get down. It's just 4 teams. We're not going to give you guys. I mean, you're obviously fans if you're listening to us of the sport, so you don't need us to tell you that the series are 2-2 or 3-2 or 2-1. That doesn't do anybody any good. So we take the week off. We come back. And during our week off, Nashville decided they want to go to the Stanley Cup. And Anaheim went, oh, fuck, that's right, it's the Western Conference Finals. Let's just go ahead and lose. Because that's what they do. They're terrible. And Nashville did it in 6, and they did it in so here's a fun fact about Steve and I. Steve conveniently is able to witness the entire game every night. I work midnights, so every night I leave, depending on the start time of the game, either in the middle of the third or the start of the third, and then I check the score about an hour later. So when I look at like Nashville and I read the statistics and I'm like, oh, it's 6-3. Oh, Nashville won confidently going away, and then I text Steve and I'm like, way to go Nashville. He's like, no, dude, they barely won that game, and I'm like, what are you talking about? It's 6-3, and he's like, 2 empty net goals, and then he told me all about the game, and I'm like, oh. And then it down up 3-1, and Nashville only had, 18 shots, I believe?
If that. And I think at one point, in the second period, they only had 7 shots total.
And Anaheim had, 48 or something stupid like that?
Yeah, I think the shot differential in the second period was 20-7 at the end of the second.
That's not a place you want to be in. How did they?
But they were up 2-0.
So for those of us who didn't get to see the third period, how did they walk away with this victory so high if they weren't playing as good? Is it just Bernier?
I don't know if it was necessarily Bernier's fault. One of the goals, it was kind of a weak goal, but to be honest with you, Anaheim was taking some bad penalties, and the rest were starting to call them on some really chintzy stuff, which gave, at one point they had a 5, it was Anaheim, they got a 5-minute major. They had a 5-minute power play, and Nashville did not register a shot on goal in the 5-minute power play. But
Ouch.
Anaheim had 2 shots on goal in their power play. So it was a pretty interesting turn of events, and that kind of, I think, shifted the momentum for Anaheim to come back and play. And their top guys played really, really well in that game. But I think at the end of the day, like, it's going to sound really just cliche and just kind of like redundant, but Nashville wanted that way more. You could tell when Anaheim tied it, they didn't get rattled. You know, I give a lot of credit to Peter Laviolette, their coach. He settled them down. You know, I think he used the challenge and the goal when they were going to tie it more as a timeout kind of mechanism, so he could maybe calm them down, kind of be like, listen, if the goal is good, it's fine, but we need to calm down. We need to get back into our game. And then, like, a shift after that, they came back, and I think 2 minutes later after that goal, they scored again. So, and then it was 2 empty net goals, and, you know, the rest is history. So
yeah, and, you know, when you look at a team like Anaheim, and as much as we've ripped on the show, you know, I'm just looking, pull up stats, obviously, because we're recording. And you look at, like, the top 20 list, and you're like, well, okay, they had Getzlaf at number 2, 19 points through 17 games. That's a good place to be in. Then you scroll down, you see Silverberg and Raquel are 10 and 11 with 14 and 13 points. And then you see Corey Perry down there at number 18 with 11 points. They didn't underperform. It's just they were, and I think we've talked about this all throughout this postseason, which feels like we're in, like, year 3 of the postseason. But we've talked about this all throughout Anaheim's postseason, specifically Anaheim, because they're in my opinion, the number one proponent of this. They've seemed almost apathetic at times. Yes, they are I refer to them often as a punch you in the mouth kind of team, and they are, but there are often times where it feels like whole teams take shifts off or take periods off, and they're just like, we're fucking Anaheim. Like, we'll be back next year. You know what I mean? Like, I think they're living in that world that, like, Chicago made and that Chicago lives in, where it's like, well, we've already got a cup. It was in 07, but we've already got a cup and we're fine. I don't know. Maybe I'm misperceiving it, but I watched 2 periods of every single game, and it just never felt to me like Anaheim. Even Anaheim's wins felt to me like it was like you can't deny Getzlaf, Perry, Kessler, Raquel. These guys have skill, so they're going to win games. You're going to score. You're going to win games 5-3, 4-2. But you're also in a 7-game series. A team like Nashville that is pure heart is going to at some point turn that tide. And I don't know. Maybe, again, as I turn to you always every week, maybe you can explain this better because you are able to see more of these games and have a little bit better of a hockey mind than me.
Yeah, I think the one thing you saw in Game 6 from Anaheim, you finally saw desperation. Like, especially when Nashville went up 2-0, it's like they flipped some switch and they're like, oh, hey, we might get eliminated. Let's score some goals and play some hockey. And, like, they started taking over that second period. It was nuts. Even though they took this major penalty, which could have ultimately put the nail in the coffin in the game, they killed the penalties off. They played really, really well that whole game. But they could have won that game, and I would have not batted an eye about it because I've been like, yeah, they deserve to win. They outperformed Nashville in every facet of that game. But when it mattered, Nashville just did what they did. They scored the goals that they needed to score. And they had a hat trick, too, which helped. And 2 empty net goals. I think, I know you're down 1 goal, but to pull your goalie with about 3 minutes left basically is icing in the coffin if they score. And then they pulled the goalie again. And like, I get it. It's an elimination game, but I thought that was just, you pulling the goalie that early, I've never been a fan of. And that kind of just, the next 2 minutes is like, well, it's 5-3. We're not going to win. It just takes the wind out of your sails so hard.
No, I've never agreed with something you've said more. I've actually often, I know that, like, a hockey purist would say that I'm stupid for saying this, but I've been a believer that pulling the goalie, at least in my experience in seeing it and, living it in times that I've played, it so rarely works out that it's kind of like when you, like, okay, so say, to transfer this to another sport, if you go to baseball and it's the 7th inning, you got a lefty coming up and you bring a lefty pitcher in, like, the numbers are skewed and obvious now that it doesn't work out more often than not, but they still do it. Like, it's one of those things that it feels, maybe more like tradition. Like, well, this is what people have to do to win, right? Let's get 6 guys on their 4, even though we've outshot them like 3-1 in this entire game, and they're still winning. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it. Maybe I'm just kind of speaking of this from an ignorant perspective, but that's the way it feels. Go ahead.
I kind of agree with you. I think the one situation it works better in is if the other team takes a penalty, so you're 6-on-4. That gives you a lot more room on the ice. When you're 6-on-5 is very cluttered. It's very hard to move the puck. And, honestly, a lot of these tactics that Anaheim plays in, they play a dump and chase game, and Nashville is more of a possession team. So it's like Nashville is going to be ready for the dump. And that's what happened when, when Anaheim pulled their goalie, they kept trying to dump it in or skate it through 3 defenders to get to the zone. It's like, that's not going to work. And then you're going to have to try to score on Pekka Rinne, which, he's
good
been outstanding this postseason. I'm just going to say that lightly. He's probably my front runner to get the Conn Smythe at this rate. But I just think that the whole sentiment of pulling the goalie early, just like you said, just to put it in layman's terms for most people, the success rate has got to be very minimal. It's got to be under 10%.
That's something I want to look into for a future episode to revisit, because I'm going to put a checkpoint in this, or check mark in this to revisit that later on, because that is something that has always bothered me specifically in hockey as a hockey fan. It's like, this just doesn't work a lot. It just doesn't make a lot of sense, and it's kind of like, it's like going for 2 in football. Like it's different now because they changed the rules in football to make the 2 more feasible, but it just so rarely happened that it was like, why? Like, you're just increasing the chance of negative things happening.
Not to mention, like, when you're 6-on-5, you're basically playing like a power play format, and the power play format for Anaheim has kind of been wishy-washy this series. The first 2 series, their power play was clicking. It was on point. This series, it's been kind of hit or miss. So it's like, that's in the back of their mind. Oh, we got to get a goal. We have 2.5 minutes. We pulled our goalie. There's so many things you're running through your mind, and then you're trying to score a goal on top of it. Just, I'm not the biggest fan of that.
And I'm not either. And I wasn't... That's okay. So here's the thing. So over on Fanarchy, I don't know if you listen every week, but it was asked of me last week on the show, like, what's going on in the NHL playoffs, and I'm like, oh god, it's so boring. Like, to try to describe that to like not hockey people, like I said, oh yeah, you guys know the trap, and they're like, they have no fucking idea what you're talking about. So to try to describe the trap to somebody is like, it's nigh impossible. You're trying to describe the dullest version of your own sport. Like, this is the sport I love, but they're playing the most boring version there is, and it's really boring. And it's so boring. I'm out of, like, I talk for a living, and I cannot find more words to describe it other than boring, dull, monotonous, repetitive. These are all words to describe the trap to me. And this is just as a hockey, to some extent, a hockey commentator, a hockey viewer for sure. It's just like, it's like waves on a shore, man. Like I believe it was Dave Loza who said, I get it. Like, the strategic side of my brain gets that's how that works, and that's a way to. And maybe you can elaborate on this further. It's a way to accommodate for lack of skill. Like, when you don't have a Crosby or a Malkin or a Kessel, you make up for that by strategizing around them and strategizing a scheme that doesn't allow anybody to do anything. But oh my god, is it so painful, excruciatingly painful to watch. And especially in a series like Nashville Anaheim. We haven't jumped to the East yet, which is where this anger comes from. But especially in a series like Nashville Anaheim, where your biggest star is a guy like Ryan Getzlaf or, Corey Perry, who are both just dull as dirt. And, maybe wrap up that, and then we'll jump over to the East. Go ahead, Steve.
I think the one thing for the trap is, one, it's going to slow down teams dramatically, because a lot of teams like Anaheim, or a lot of teams like the Predators, rely on a long first pass a long stretch pass. And the one thing that the 1-3-1 does is it neutralizes that mid-ice pass, and it makes it so you either have to try to skate through 3 people or try to dump and get past them, which generally that's the strategy. But then you got to remember, goalies can play the puck one behind the net, which Pekka Rinne is pretty good at. He showed a lot of that in the last, few games here. And then not to mention that Nashville's defenders are very agile. They can skate very well. So it's like you're literally trying to outrace 2 defenders for the puck race, and then 2, you're trying to skate through or pass through 3 people in the neutral zone, which is very difficult. So that neutralizes speed and the stretch pass, which that's just basically the bread and butter of most teams nowadays in the NHL is speed and a stretch pass. It's 1 pass, 2 pass, gone. They're at the blue line already. So I think the common fan is, unless they can visualize it, they're not really going to understand it. But it's a viable tactic. Teams have used it for a really long time, but I've openly mocked this strategy because, as you said, it's kind of, if you don't have good forechecking or some, fast forechecking forwards who can play defensively really well, it's really easy to just lull teams into sleep and make really easy turnovers. And that's the one thing too. Anaheim's transition game is flawless because they play the 1-3-1, so they get a neutral zone turnover and they're the other way with an odd man rush almost instantly. So it can work. I don't like the play of it because it takes a game that's naturally supposed to be fast and makes it slow on purpose.
It takes a game.
I'm not a fan of that.
Well, it takes a game that at its most exciting is fast paced and skilled, and takes all of that right out of the game. Like it's again, to transfer it to another sport, it's kind of like when the Philadelphia Eagles started running that was a cover 2, I believe it was called, or deep 2, where you had 2 cornerbacks playing like 30 yards back, and then another 2 playing like 20 yards back, as opposed to having 4 almost at the line. So they were basically covering the stretch pass. So it was like, this is the fun part of the game. We're going to go ahead and eliminate this. You're going to go ahead and have to run it all day long. And
run it or throw for 5 yards at a time.
Yeah, and checkdowns and hard running are boring as shit to watch football. And just the same as in hockey, when you're trying to dink and dunk your way into the zone and it's not happening, that is dull as dirt. Speaking of dull as dirt, let's move over to the Ottawa-Pittsburgh series, where 4 of the top 5 scorers in the entire postseason are on a team that didn't get more than 1 goal last night. Although, if you ask me, they got more than 1 goal. And what the fuck is goaltender interference today? Steve, I ask you, I hit my mute button and I say, please try to save me before I scream my throat out.
I wish I had an answer for you, because that's the first thing we were text. The amazing thing about that instance, when you texted me, I was literally in the box texting you, what is goaltender interference? Because this postseason has literally shown me that the referees have a game-by-game basis of what an actual rule adaptment is. I've seen a lot of people, a lot of Pittsburgh fans complain today about the officiating, which I don't think the officiating was bad. I thought the officiating was acceptable, but the goaltender interference calls have been blatantly just dumb. I don't understand what the rule is anymore. I've even seen some, hockey journalists being like, I don't even know what the damn rule is anymore. I can't tell you. Like, the adaptation of the rule, I think, is changed and morphed into a completely different thing now. It's like, you can score goals with goaltender interference, as long as it doesn't happen exactly when the goaltender is trying to make a stop. He can get interfered with until he needs to make a save.
And even then, sometimes,
case
in point, last night,
or I don't know, I can clip your back leg so you can't kick it all the way out to make a save. You're outside of the crease, though. It doesn't matter. Like, the rules. This is the one thing about hockey that frustrates a lot of the common fan, and myself included, is there's so many adaptations of a rule. It's all by how it's viewed by the official itself, who's going to make the call. And I guess it's the human error of refereeing in general, but at the same instance, it's kind of like, we need a uniform policy here. This is getting out of control.
No, it's to the point where,
and in the playoffs, in a game-deciding game.
Yeah, a series-deciding game. Yeah, absolutely. And it's to the point where you could take 2 teams like Pittsburgh and Ottawa in a series that I could give a fuck less about. Like, make no mistake, I just hate Ottawa so much that I'm watching these series begrudgingly. Like, I'm watching these games with hate in my heart. And I'm still screaming at the TV, like, what the fuck is goaltender interference? Define it for me, because you changed the rules to suit your narrative. That's the way it feels to me at this point, because you want to define goaltender interference as that, but it's totally okay for God, I forget who it was. Somebody on Ottawa just punching Sidney Crosby in the face right at the beginning of the game. Or we're going to call a penalty if you slightly slow down a player for interference, but it's totally okay as soon as the whistle blows to more or less out and out fight each other. That's totally fine if you're Ottawa. Like, I'm not a believer in conspiracy theories or that the NHL favors single teams. Like, I think that that's all just blind, like as Stephen Colbert put it perfectly, blind regional hatred. But for every one of those, there is also times where I do get the feeling that the NHL does, at least in some part, want their series to be longer, to sell more tickets, and to sell more product. Like, I get that to some level. I respect it. I know that, like, our sport is at best a marginalized, somewhat like sub-elite sport. I get that. I know it's expensive to play, and I know that means a lot of kids aren't going to watch it and aren't going to give a fuck who's in what. And I understand that the way to compensate for that is to have every series go to 6 or 7 games because it's way more exciting. What I don't get and what I don't like is what seems to be a unilateral message to the refs to call these games occasionally in favor of one team and not always the same. And that is mind-numbingly irritating to someone like me who is spending, hours trying to refute people who are saying that that's what's going on, when it just, that's what it looks like. It looks like these, refs are like, oh, hey, well, if Pittsburgh wins this game, that's over. We won't have a Game 7. But if Ottawa wins, we can get another game out of this. We could stretch this out a little bit more, work a little bit longer, and make a little bit more money out of this. It's like over on Fanarchy, we're talking about the McGregor-Mayweather fight. Like, we know that fight won't actually matter, but they'll drag it out as long as possible to milk as much money from, the plebs as they can. And that's what this feels like to me. It doesn't feel like when you have 4 of the top goddamn 5 scorers in the entire postseason, you shouldn't be going to a Game 7. Like, that should have been 2-1, and Pittsburgh can then just step on their neck a little bit. And instead, we're sitting here talking about a Game 7, and we can't give you the Stanley Cup preview because we don't know who the fucking other team is going to be. I don't know. Rant over. Step in.
No, I definitely agree with you. Like, the instance of the refereeing, like, I remember watching the Anaheim-Calgary series, and, like, Calgary took, 14. They were called for, 15 penalties in the first 2 games. Anaheim was called for 4. And it's like, okay. And people are saying, well, Calgary's undisciplined. Maybe so. But that's a very substantial lopsided amount of calls per one team. And in those instances, you have to think, why are these calls being made against this team? And if you go back and look at a lot of calls in that series, they were the referees just calling penalties because the team was notoriously, not a disciplined team. So it's like, they know they're going to do something stupid, so they're just going to call them for it instead of just being like, hey, don't do that. Let's keep it going. Instead, and then you wonder why the team gets swept is because 40% of the actual minutes played were shorthanded by the Calgary Flames. I looked that number up. That was insane when I read that. So it just goes to show you that it's been happening the whole postseason. This is the first postseason where I've actually watched almost every game of every series to some extent, and I've seen a lot of the penalty calls, and a lot of the penalty calls have been really bad. Even the last game, okay, the Pittsburgh game, after the first goal was scored, the power play that put Pittsburgh up 2-0 was probably one of the worst slashing calls I've ever seen. Guy going down the ice, gives him a little tap, referee throws his hands up, okay? Penalty. They score 2-0, and then it starts the rout. And they get another power play later in the game where they're up 6-0, or it was 5-0. They get another power play from a really, really weird call, and then they go up 7-0, okay? And then Pittsburgh gets a slashing penalty 2 minutes later on the same call that set them up to be 2-0, when it's just why are we calling these slashing penalties in a 7-0 game?
More importantly,
let it go.
More importantly, why are we calling slashing penalties when one series ago, 1 fucking week ago, when they were playing Ottawa, everything went. When it was Ottawa-Pittsburgh, it was a fucking Royal Rumble for 7 games. They were.
You mean Ottawa, New York?
No, I'm talking about specifically Pittsburgh, Washington as an example.
Okay,
like a refereeing. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Washington, Pittsburgh, and Washington. When you're talking about a juxtaposition of refereeing, when those refs called the Pittsburgh-Washington series, it was a fucking Royal Rumble. It was like every 5 minutes, ding, 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 who's going to come in? Da, 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 here's John Cena with a chair. He's going to clear the ring out, and then we're going to bring out another 10 guys. Like, it was that bad. It was like you had hacking going on, you had elbows being thrown, you know. It was to a point where I think I texted you about this. They were able to point out something that Sidney Crosby had to learn as a 16-year-old kid with his coach, who is now actually the head coach of Ottawa. I believe it's Guy Boucher, where he would stay after practice and have Guy Boucher throw on a pair of skates and hack him between the hash marks, because in both of their own words, that's what goes on in the postseason. But when it's convenient for the narrative, they'll call it. Like, that's what irritates me, is that I can watch a series like Pittsburgh and Washington where they're damn near playing with 2x4s and nails at the end and they're swinging at each other. And then you go to a series like Pittsburgh-Ottawa where if they look at the goalie, it's goaltender interference, no goal. Like, that's what irritates me. It's not
non-consistency.
Yeah, it's not even consistency like game to game, because I can get that. Like, you could make a mistake one night and try to fix it the next night. Fine.
Yeah.
But when you're talking whole series are flipping, you can't tell me that stat you told me where it's Calgary played 40% of the time shorthanded. You cannot tell me in any world, you cannot convince me that Calgary was so undisciplined that 2/5 of the time they're on the ice, they're hacking and slashing. Like, there's no world where that makes any sense.
Hacking and slashing to the point where a call should be made.
Yeah, no, and that's what I'm saying, that they're hacking and slashing merits calling. Go ahead.
I'd be really interested to know who the referees were for the last series with the Capitals and the Penguins, and if it's the same referees for this series in the East. I'd be really interested to hear the names of the officials, because if it's some of the same officials, that'd be really interesting just to think about.
It definitely would, and it merits a conversation also, specifically because, you know, we have review now. They added replay for a reason, to get these calls right. And when Ottawa challenged that call and they said for goaltender interference, I thought they were going to challenge it because they didn't think it went in, or they thought it went in because they thought the play was dead. I'm like, there's a litany of other things that you can call, that you can ask for a replay for. You can ask for a coach's challenge or whatever. But for it to be goaltender interference, I almost texted you. I was like, well, that's going to be a goal because there was no goaltender interference. And then they come back and say there fucking was. Are you shitting me? Where? In what world was that goaltender interference? And, you know, how many times have we spoken on Spinning the Wheels about Peter Mrazek getting full-fledged run into, and then they count the goal? You know, was it Philip Forsberg did that in the regular season? So it's like, where do your priorities lie? Like, is your priority to call a straight game? Because if it is, bullshit. Is your priority to keep a narrative going because you're doing a good job if you're doing that? Or is your priority team favoritism and all these conspiracy theorists are right? Because I can't tell. And I should be able to tell. People like you and me, when I ask you what is the priority, you should be able to have an answer for that. But I guarantee you, if I ask you right now, you probably don't.
No, I don't.
No.
It's the hardest thing, because it's like I don't want to like put on the tinfoil hat and like agree with these people, because I'm just like, you're crazy. It's not happening. But in a sense, it's kind of like I can see the point of view, because it's like human error it's not human error anymore after a certain point. It's like there's no such thing as coincidence if it continually happens. It's not a coincidence anymore. It's a fact.
Yeah, then you're just in control. Yeah,
exactly.
Yes.
So it's like, and I know refereeing is a very, very hard job. There's a lot of things going on at the same point. And I've also, for years, have thought maybe they need to add one more referee on the ice. Go 3 and 2 linesmen. Just to have that one more vision. Just one more might help. Because I think there's a lot of things that even video replay can't help you decide what to make the call is. Sometimes you have to be able to see it at a certain angle that the referee has. And I think them implementing the ref cams would be very useful in this situation too.
Oh, God. Well, that's a pipe dream that we will never get, I don't think. I mean, that goes back to one of our first shows under the title Pucking Around, where we said I would kill for those 3 things. 4K broadcast resolution, which they can do. Canada proved it. Helmet cams, and there was another cam. Oh, the fly-by-wire cam. Like,
yep.
those three things, specifically the last two, those two different cams, which you can do because the fly-by-wire cam wouldn't affect anything. Like, don't give me like, oh, it would obstruct viewership. Not fucking true, because it didn't during the outdoor games, and that's much harder viewing. You know, for anyone who's ever been in a hockey stadium, which if you're listening to us, you've been in a hockey stadium, every seat is a good seat, and one camera being on a set of wires is not going to block your view any more than the nets above the
nets aren't
glass.
even that bad. A lot of people complain about the nets when they were out on, and then I go to a game, I'm like, it's fine. Like,
you don't see it.
Your eyes adjust.
Yeah, you don't see it in 10 seconds, and you know, a wire cam and a helmet cam would give us so much more insight into this stuff. Like, they could put a camera in boards up against lines. They put cameras in nets. Why don't we have cameras on goalie helmets or on referee helmets? And why don't we have a fly-by-wire camera? That's all I want. Like, I'm not asking for too much. So, anyways, jumping back into the actual series, outside of our 15-minute rant on refereeing, we're doing this because, and I don't mean to speak for you, Steve, but I think you agree with me, this series is really hard to speak about as an actual hockey thing. Like, go ahead.
I think to some extent it was because I'm not excited about the matchup, but watching the games has been interesting for, at least from my point of view, just watching the dynamic of the series, because there's been some injuries, there's been a goaltender change, which has shaped the last few games for Pittsburgh, which, you know, pulling Marc-Andre Fleury and then pulling Matt Murray in there, and just Matt Murray coming in there and just destroying. I think he's been playing absolutely amazing, and it's like, I didn't think that would happen. That's been exciting. It's not, I don't necessarily think it's exciting, but it's been interesting. We'll say that. I think the narrative of, you know, Crosby and his injury and some of the injuries of the Senators, how they're going to play, I think it's been interesting, but exciting is not the word I would use for this series. You're absolutely right. But interesting, maybe for me personally, a little bit more acceptable term there.
Steve, I yearn for your optimism. I yearn for your positive outlook on things, because I am so bitter at this series. Like, everybody around here is like, it's Pittsburgh, and then it's Senators. Nobody cares about Senators. It's just like, at least it's hockey. That's how I'm going. I'm like, I can watch hockey at least once every other night, and it's one of the best players in the world. I can handle it. Oh, yeah, make no mistake. I don't have any Red Wings hatred for Pittsburgh. I actually, as a team, I admire them. They've done what Chicago didn't do, which is to say they predominantly built from within, and they're doing it super well. And they're doing it
through college hockey.
Yes, and through college hockey, exactly. And you have a guy like Jake Getzel, who we didn't know existed, is number 5 in scoring in the postseason. Like, they make players better, and I like that, and I like watching Pittsburgh play. What I don't like is watching a team like Pittsburgh, who is the fun part of being of watching a Pittsburgh game is watching skilled talent, so much so that Phil Kessel is a second and sometimes third line player, just run the show, and or even match up nicely against a team like Washington. Watching them play a team like Ottawa is like watching paint dry. Like, I don't hate Ottawa because they're obscure or unknown. Like, they're fine. I nothing Ottawa. Like, I don't dislike Ottawa, the city or the team. I dislike the coach and the strategy and the way that he is seemingly coaching the excitement out of the game. And it's just so, like, I find myself pulled to my phone so often when I watch these games, where it's like,
it's kind of like it's in the background, you're hearing it, but you're not necessarily into watching it.
Yeah, they've turned a game which is my love to the point where I'm spending hundreds of dollars to produce audio for people who, you know, can't even be bothered to review our podcast. Wink, wink, listener. To the point where I love this sport so much that, like, you know, it is my hobby, it's my passion, and I cannot stand to watch these games. I can't be bothered to watch these games. I still do, because I love the sport and I have to, but man, like, it is just so hard, because it's all blue line to blue line play. It's all just hacking and slashing and rugby tie-ups in the corner, and, you know, the shots all come from 8 feet away with little to no strength, unless they're coming from one of the 4 people in the top 5 of scoring, you know, Malkin, Crosby, Kessel, and Gensel. Like, those guys are exciting, but it just they're so rarely allowed to do what they do best that it's killing me. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think the underlying determining factor for a lot of this, what's happening, and we kind of covered it before, is the last series was the series. And it happened so early in the playoffs that all the excitement now is gone. Like that excitement that you had for, man, this is Washington, this is Pittsburgh, these are the two best teams, is gone. You have your Ottawa fans who are super stoked to be there. It's kind of like the Predators saying, like, the Predators have that storyline that it's easy to get behind because you're like, yeah, that's exciting. But then you're just like, Pittsburgh could be going into the Stanley Cup final again. Maybe they repeat. Like, all right, well, whatever. But the excitement of a matchup is gone. There are no other matchups in the Stanley Cup playoffs that are exciting. Even the Stanley Cup final is probably not going to be exciting enough. And I think a lot of it too is Pittsburgh didn't look like Pittsburgh the first 3 games of this series because they were, I'm going to tell you right now, playing that long of a series, a 7-game series against one of the best teams in the league is emotionally and physically draining. They were not themselves. And not to mention the first 3 games of the series, Pittsburgh had way too many injuries where they had to reshuffle their lines like 3 times. They've had 3 different line pairings in like 4 different games. And also the last 2 games, they've had 7 defensemen, which means they have to carry 1 less forward. So they've really been shuffling a lot of their lines around, and they made a goaltender change. So it's like they don't have any consistency yet. They're still in this series, which is kind of amazing, to be honest with you. But I didn't think this would be a 7-game series. I called Pittsburgh in like 5. But Ottawa kind of showed up and proved me wrong a little bit, which is annoying as fuck because I just don't like them, and I don't like the way they play the game. I don't dislike the players. I think Karlsson is an excellent player. He's probably in the prime to win the Conn Smythe if they get to the Stanley Cup Finals. Like I think after all the Penguins, he is legit the next person in line on the scoring chart. I think he's 7th. So he's up there. He's played extremely well. I mean, he sat out that one blowout game in the 3rd period because he was kind of hurt. You know, Ottawa's had some injuries too. It's that time of the year where things are just going to happen. But overall, the series has just been like really lackluster because the excitement level for, I think, 90% of the fans is gone. It's just gone because the average fan is tuned out. Ovechkin's gone. It's Pittsburgh and who? Ottawa? I don't know anybody on Ottawa. They might know Karlsson. Maybe. The average fan probably doesn't give a shit anymore. It's it.
You've never crystallized an opinion more so than you just did right there. And pardon me, I have to. Oh, excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Oh, I'm still a little bit sick. Forgive me, but yeah, I mean that's what it is. Is that you, for lack of better terms, the NHL on the whole, specifically the Eastern Conference, blew the wad. Like after Pittsburgh, Washington, and man, you nailed it. Like we covered this. There's nothing left. Like the only interesting narrative would have been left in the East would have been, let's see what Lundqvist can do in the postseason. Let's see what Lundqvist can do in the finals. But even that's gone, ruined by Ottawa with their fucking trap. Like that's what it is that you took. I think I said it on Fanarchy 2 weeks ago. You took what was the potential for an exciting postseason, and you took all of the good stories and you kicked them out of the playoffs. And I know that's, quote unquote, that's competition. I get it. Like Chicago, if they wanted to have another run at it, needed to be better. If Montreal wanted to win, they needed to score more. If New York wanted to win, they needed to stop more goals. Like I get it. I know that. But like it's to the point now where Pittsburgh, to me, at least from what I've seen, as you described on accident, they have felt like a team that is honestly just retooling for the Cup Finals. They're like, okay, well, Fleury let in a bunch of goals. Let's see what Murray can do. Which, by the way, personal side note, thank God I actually get to see Matt Murray play because it's been a running narrative on this show. I've seen him play maybe 3 games my whole life, and 2 of them have been this week. Like, anyways, back to the point. They feel like they're messing with lines. They're messing with combinations a little bit, not too much. They're fucking with their D pairings because I just don't think that they're taking Ottawa too seriously, and that's a mistake that teams that run the trap often get made against them. Like that is a mistake that happens a lot. That is, Brodeur notwithstanding, that is how the Devils won the Cup in '95. Was teams often forgot that this team will not let you score. Plain and simple. Like they might not score a whole lot, but you're not going to score against them. And that's why seeing a 7-0 aberration like the other night was so strange for me, because that's the only thing Ottawa does well is they don't let you score. But even then, they couldn't do that right. So it's like, I don't know. I want this series to be over. I really badly do, specifically because I want to talk about the Stanley Cup Finals, because Nashville, and one thing I do have to touch on is I don't think it's a fair comparison you made Nashville to Ottawa, because it's not. Ottawa fans, there were empty seats at those games. Nashville is sold out forever and always and packed to the ceiling. Ottawa, they have a couple empty seats. Not many, but a couple. And you can still purchase tickets for $80 to go to those games. Nashville, good fucking luck. Nashville is there's nary a city left that is more hype than Nashville. Pittsburgh's close, but they're not quite Smashville. I want to see, please just get this done, Pittsburgh. Just get to the final so that I can actually talk about a somewhat interesting matchup. Because here's a good point to end it on, or not end right away, but last conversation to have, and I'll ask you, sell me Ottawa Nashville. Sell me as a fan that is going to tune into this because it's on NBC. It's going to be their most lauded event. It's the finals. Sell me Ottawa Nashville and how any fan is supposed to, any non-fan or barely a fan is supposed to give a flying fuck about that series.
Okay, here we go. Two of the best offensive defensemen in the game, PK Subban, Erik Karlsson, vying for the Conn Smythe Trophy with the two best goaltenders statistically in the playoffs right now, Craig Anderson, Pekka Rinne. Not to mention, the teams can kind of score some goals. They have been known to score some goals occasionally. I mean, you have the Canadian aspect of it too as well. That's going to bring a lot of viewership. That's the first Canadian team in the Stanley Cup final in how long?
9 years?
Got it. Yeah, it's got to be almost 10 years.
07, wasn't it Anaheim and Ottawa?
Anaheim, Ottawa, yeah. It could be their 10-year anniversary. Look at that. But
Anaheim blew that.
Right. That could have, another narrative of this year got blown out of the water. But yeah, that would be the way I would sell it. Because, to me, even that, it's kind of exciting. I want to see PK Subban win a Stanley Cup. That's my thing. Because of the year he had, after all the adversity that he faced on top of that, to cement his legacy of being a good goaltender and a big middle finger to Montreal is for him to win the Stanley Cup.
I wanted Nashville Montreal so bad. That was the other thing I wanted. I wanted my personal desires and my personal narratives were, first and foremost, I wanted Washington. Not because they're the best, but because I've never wanted a team to win more.
Ovechkin.
Yeah, Ovechkin. I've never wanted a player to cement his legacy more. But secondly I wanted to see Montreal-Nashville because PK versus Shea Weber. Weber and Subban, that would have been a matchup for the ages. No more perfect story-driven narrative. Anyways, so
I was going to say, not to mention PK Subban, he's just a likable dude.
He is.
He does so many good things for the communities that he plays in. I don't remember the last time a guy donated $1 million to a hospital and got traded 2 weeks after for a character issue.
So
he donated $1 million, but whatever.
So should we wrap this up by spelling our names over piano?
Jesus.
That commercial is killing me. It is the worst thing I've ever seen. I know that this is already covered, I think, last week on Puck Soup, but they really brought to attention, how annoying that commercial is. HULLEMIGRECROYZ. Go fuck yourself, I don't care anymore. I stopped caring, 20 minutes ago into this 2-minute commercial. It's so bad. Maybe that speaks more to our overall narrative of this postseason. Pucking Around's narrative, by the way, when I say our narrative, that the NHL cannot promote any stories because there are none. They all died off when Washington, New York, Montreal, Chicago, Minnesota, and San Jose got eliminated. Those were the only teams that had any excitement in them. And you could even pepper in a little Columbus. Like, all those teams were way more exciting, and we just got down to the teams with good fundamentals. Like, we literally just got 4 San Antonio Spurs. Just all two-handed layups and safe passes. And
yeah. Yeah.
Just a hard yeah.
Get them done, do it right, boys.
Yes. And I'll give you a final word, and then I'll wrap this bad boy up. Go ahead, buddy.
Well, yeah, like I said, I'm just hoping Pittsburgh pulls through. If not, I think for the reasons listed, I think the Ottawa series could be good. I don't want to get it confused. I don't think Ottawa's a bad team. They've gotten this far because of reasons. They played good goaltending. They play solid defense. They have timely scoring when they need it. But I'd rather see Sidney Crosby in a Stanley Cup final going for his second Stanley Cup against the Nashville Predators going for their first or third Stanley Cup. My bad. I meant 2 like back-to-back, but first back-to-back in a while.
Can I just say I secretly wanted you to be like, okay, go ahead, and you to be like F-R-A-N. But a good way to end it. Anyways, to all of our listeners, we ask, as we do every week, subscribe to us, rate us, review us on iTunes. It is, I cannot stress the level of importance on that. It helps us immensely, and it helps us to spread the word about this show and get us ready for what will be a good season next season. If you're not into iTunes, you can check us out on TuneIn Radio, Podbean, Stitcher, Facebook. I think we're even on the Google Play Store. I'm not sure about that. You can follow the brand on Twitter at SportsRadioDET. You can follow our sister show whenever we decide to tweet again at STW_SRD. You can follow myself on Twitter at JMPinkham. You can follow Steve on Twitter at
Franchise GFX.
Check out our website at sportsradiodetroit.com. That's really important too. Thank you, and we'll see you guys next week.